So as people are just still joining here, I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Samantha Van Ham. I send out the communications from the Transboundary Grasslands Partnership, and I work for the Alberta Prairie Conservation Forum. So just a quick note to start off about the TGP. There we go. A quick note about the TGP. It was established with the purpose of achieving better grasslands conservation outcomes by communicating, connecting, and collaborating across the TGP boundary. And so that geography includes northern Montana, southern Alberta, and southern Saskatchewan. And our core team holds quarterly meetings. And then we also host an annual workshop with the location of the workshop rotating between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Montana. This year, our workshop will be in Saskatchewan, so stay tuned for details on that as we get organized. And so, yeah, for today's webinar, I will be recording it and I'll send it out afterwards in case you want to refer back. And if you have any questions throughout, just save them for the end and we should be able to have time to answer at the end of the presentation. And so with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Hossam Abdelhabez. He is a biodiversity modeler with the Government of Alberta, and he'll be presenting on divergent trends in structural landscape connectivity from historic and potential future grassland conservation in Alberta, Canada. So go ahead, take it away, Hossam. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I hope everyone is doing well and can hear me well. So as Sam just mentioned, I'm Hossam Moniem. This is my scientific name that I go with my publications. I'm a biodiversity modeler with Lands Planning Branch in Ministry of Environmental Protected Areas in Alberta. But this work is a part of my research, my previous research as a postdoc with the University of Toronto. And it has been a crucial component of a larger NSERC project that looked at large-scale connectivity in the province. So with that being said, I'm wearing this hat today, and I'm speaking about this project from this angle. And I hope you will find it interesting. So to get started, first, this is the publication that is out there on this project. And as I mentioned, this was a part of a bigger collaboration from NSERC Alliance and the ABMI, our strategic partners, and the Beef Cattle Research Council. So these collaborations and funders helped bringing this work to light. Here is a QR code if you are interested in reading the full publication. It's published on +ONE. You can scan the QR code and then you will be able to access the article itself. So the way I would like to structure this talk is just the housekeeping things. You will see here on the top ribbon where we are in the presentation. I'm going to start by giving some background and move to the objectives of this research. And in terms of like the introduction, I'm going to share some concepts that are fundamental for understanding the work. In terms of the methodology, we will talk more about how we modeled connectivity for this project. And for our results, we'll talk about maps. So there will be a lot of maps and map interpretation. And then we will move at the end to the conclusion part. So as we all know, the prairie region in Canada is presented by these three prairie provinces: Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. A lot of the grasslands are concentrated in the southern part. These are the Canadian prairie regions, which are very important for biodiversity. It's quite diverse in terms of the distribution of grasses, tall grass prairies, short prairies, and mixed prairies. And on the north here, we have the boreal forest, and in between some aspen parkland. This area here in Alberta is in the southeast part of the province, and most of it is grassland and pastures. And the leftover native grasslands have been now maintained by only rangelands. So they are kept as rangelands. So more than 80% of this grassland now have been converted also into cropland because of the demand, the international food demand, and also to other land uses like urbanization to accommodate for the expanding number of populations in the provinces. So this is what our grassland prairie look like. You can see it's a beautiful landscape, quite diverse, and supports a lot of wildlife and flora and fauna in the areas. A lot of them, or most of, like we have large number of species that have been reported as at-risk species. There are also some generalist species that provide a lot of ecosystem services and just maintain the quality of life and the biodiversity in the area. So with the pressing demands of anthropogenic expansions and the transition into annual crops for most of these tall grass prairies or the grassland areas in general, and conversions of land uses into urbanization, as you can see, a lot of these natural landscapes are not the same anymore, and the natural feature have translated or turned it into more unnatural or more anthropogenic impacted features, which declines the biodiversity as time goes. And as we will see today in the presentation, as we apply more severe and more harsh conversion of these natural grasslands, we left almost with nothing for connectivity. So it's really important, and the motive of this work is to maintain the biodiversity for ecosystem services, which aligns as well with the land trust stewardship priorities in the province. So with that motive, we wanted to study and to come up with our research objectives. We want to quantify the impact of the present state of grasslands on maintaining landscape permeability, to what degree whatever left over can support the large-scale connectivity, and also to determine how conversion of the remaining grassland can impact structural landscape connectivity at the multiple different scales in the province. These are the specific objectives for this particular project, but again, it's part of a larger project, the NSERC Alliance, and this particular project helped as well integrating landscape connectivity as I'm hearing noises. Okay. You hear me well? Thumbs up.
Yes, we can hear you, Hossam.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I heard some noise in the background, so I was not quite sure if this is like yeah. Anyways, yes, and then another big objective of this project as well is to remove these technical obstacles for practitioners and people who want to apply landscape connectivity models or use these models. How would you do them in more accessible way? Some of the deliverables of this project is presented by the journal article in +1 that I shared with you. We have the scenario resistance maps, and we have the current density maps, and also there is a grassland connectivity workshop that was done. If you are interested in any of these deliverables, you can reach us out, and then we will be happy to assist you where you can find these resources. So moving to some concepts, when we talk about connectivity, we probably hear this word a lot, and mainly what our conception of connectivity is more about permeability, because connectivity is a species-specific component. But generally, we specify
No
it, or
sound.
like, we identify it as the degree to which the landscape can facilitate or impede the movement of animals in the landscape. So in our presentation today, we are more concerned about terrestrial landscapes. So we will be talking about terrestrial animals and terrestrial movements. If you think about this landscape with their features in this landscape, you can see some ponds, you can see some natural areas, you can see grasslands, you can see roads. So these are structure components in the landscape and connectivity that is based on just these features in the landscape without consideration to the animals themselves or how they move is called structure connectivity. The other type of connectivity is functional connectivity, and here's where we think more from a species perspective. What are the features that can support the movement of these individuals in the landscape? And we collect specific data about the movement of these individuals in the landscape. That can be from radio tracking, from gene flow studies that confirms or supports where these animals actually can move. And that is what we call functional connectivity. Either way, both types of connectivity complement each other, and they are very important in promoting ecosystem services, also addressing issues for species with conservation demands and to maintain gene flow in the landscape and biodiversity in general. So this is the concept of connectivity. But if we want to quantify this connectivity, what do we do? How do we model this connectivity, and what do we learn from the patterns of these results? Well, there is a lot of different concepts and approaches to model connectivity. What we will focus on today is the approach that we used in this particular paper, and that's a graph circuit theory based approach. So basically, if you think of this landscape, like theoretical landscape, as an area that has some habitat, some terrestrial habitat in green, water in blue, and some matrix in between that has kind of, less quality of a habitat for a species to move. And then you have a point A and a point B, and think of some individuals that would like to reach from point A to point B, and they are going to encounter this landscape. So what we do, we translate this landscape into a landscape resistance. So simply we assign different values of resistance to what we think is forming a complete barrier, like water here, for example, and thus it takes a higher value. What is a perfect habitat that takes the lowermost value, that is number 1 here, for example, that represents these two habitats. And the matrix in between is some sort of an intermediate value or some arbitrary value that is not as high or not as low. So if you think of how the animals would move in this landscape or on this resistance map, the first thing we think about is least coast path, and that is the shortest coast path that an individual can encounter to reach from point A to point B. But because organisms in the landscape do not perceive the landscape this way, and there is a lot of options that can happen in the landscape, another alternative, more prominent way in the literature is the all potable pathways or the current density maps. So this simply came from the circuit theory approaches and concepts in physics, and how we can model all the resistance in this layer, in this resistance surface, how we can model the current of random walkers that move from point A to point B, which simulates the all possible pathways that an animal or an individual can take to reach from point A to point B. This results into these two outputs or these two maps. So we have a resistance map that summarizes a resistance surface in the landscape, where, for example, in this figure here, high resistance is dark and low resistance is light colors. So if you think about this feature here from north to south as a road that is non-permeable feature in the landscape, there is a gap here in between that would facilitate movement. There are some matrix in between, and there are some protected areas or some high-value landscapes, these white patches that are very low and kind of in resistance and support the movement of animals in between. This is a corridor, for example. And then when we model current density, this is what we end up with. So we end up with a current density map where high denotes areas of pinch points. So for example, that gap in the road that we've seen here shows where the current is forced to move from this side of the map to the other side of the map. Areas like these are areas of diffused current. You see the current is pretty much going everywhere. And then cool areas or more purple areas are areas with less current flow. What's important here to keep in mind is when we interpret these maps, um, it's important to put the entire map in perspective, because the value of each pixel in this map is the contribution of this pixel to the large scale connectivity in that map. So it's not an absolute value per se for this particular pixel, but it's the context of this pixel within the surroundings, to what degree this pixel contributes to a larger scale map. So this is the concept that we will use to model the structural landscape connectivity model for our study. Okay, so so far we talked about the concept of connectivity. We have our objective is we want to model these scenarios of grassland conversion, and we want to know what is going to happen. So we have the tool, we have the concept or like the goal, and then now we need to think about the human footprints. How are we going to model connectivity? The second component is the human footprints. So because this is structured connectivity, we use human footprints as a degree to assess the unnaturalness in the landscape. So we basically look into natural features in the landscape as natural features and anthropogenic features as non-natural features, and then we assess the degree of naturalness based on that. So we use the ABMI human footprints and data layers that are very robust, very high detailed, very world-class data set that presents more than 100 features of different types of human footprints. And then each of these human footprints were evaluated based on their existence and their intensity of use. You can refer to Marikit, our paper on the large-scale landscape connectivity models, the species agnostic models for Alberta, to learn more about this. But as an example, just to show you which data set we used here, we relied on the average of human footprint and the intensity of use. So if you think of a highway, for example, or a road that has been assigned a value of 0.5 as a resistance value versus uh, um, a road that is intensely used, it's been assigned a 0.7, so you can see the difference between less used versus more used, and then in between is an average of that. So the penalty for the footprint itself to exist, and a penalty for its degree of our intensity of use, and an average value in between, which we call the middle of the way map. You can learn more about this in Marikit 2020. This resistance layer was informed as well with insight into Alberta's ecoregions. So these values have been weighted differently in the north side of the province versus the south side. North side is more dominated by boreal forests versus the south side that is more impacted by human footprints. So that was put in consideration when these layers were created. And then we considered about 45,000 grassland polygons in our study area that informed our study. So that is the human footprint data layers that we used. And then we wanted to have some rules that tell us, okay, now we are concerned about the conversion of grasslands into agriculture or like croplands. If we want to apply these scenarios, where do we start? Which lands first should convert into from grassland to cropland, and which comes next, and so on. So to do that, we based our models on the land suitability rating system. And this is a national rating system that uses information on climate, soil, and landscapes. And it basically classifies the landscapes or the soils into different categories, and each category represents the suitability of that category to be converted into croplands or to produce crops. Um, in Alberta, we don't have class 1, so we start with class 2. And when we say class 2, that is slight. So class 2 here is the dark green colors that you see. And when we say slight, it has slight challenges to be converted to cropland. So this is the most suitable category that can be converted into grassland. So if you think of what is the easiest class to convert into grassland given the climate and soil and landscape features or categories or characterizations, it's going to be class number 2, followed by class number 3, which is moderate difficulty in converting it into cropland, and then class number 4, class number 5, and so on. So our focus is in this zone now, is in this area where most of the grasslands are. So we started with converting every grassland that is in this category into cropland. So that denotes our scenario number 2. We called it number 2 because it corresponds to class number 2 in the land suitability rating systems, and because we developed 2 other models that I will talk about shortly. The second scenario is when we convert all grasslands in category 2 and category 3 into croplands. So now we assume that everything has been converted into class number 2. What's left is in category number 3, so we convert everything in 2 and 3, and so on. So class number the third scenario is converting everything from 2 to 4, and then the last one is scenario number 5, where we convert everything possible into cropland. Beyond that, it's kind of unrealistic, and will introduce bias to the results. So we stopped at this level of conversion. So with this in mind, reviewing the steps where we started. So we started with the human footprints and the land suitability rating map, where we thought of where the grassland conversion should happen next. And then we thought of these different scenarios of conversion, these progressive scenarios. What is going to happen if we move from that scenario to more progressive one, and created resistance maps specifically for each one of these particular scenarios. And then we used GFlow, which is a circuit theory-based modeling software that handles large data sets, very, very similar to CircuitScape, but it can handle large data sets at higher resolutions for computation capacity. And we developed we computed the current density maps that correspond to each one of these different scenarios. So this is, in a nutshell, what the modeling exercise is about, without going too much into gory details. But what I want you to pay attention to here, or to just, realize what we have been doing, is when we talk about the transition from one scenario to a more aggressive scenario, what it looks like. So this is a snapshot of an area in the South Saskatchewan land use framework unit, where you can see pretty much most of the land use classes or land suitability rating system classes. And on the picture to the right, we like overlaid our grassland layer on top of this. So you create the separation between, we are not actually modeling or converging everything in the land suitability rating system, but we do for the grasslands that overlaps with these different classes. So here in scenario number 2, you see that we have converted all grassland that overlaps with class number 2, which is more suitable for being converted into grassland. In scenario number 3, we converted everything in the light and in the green shades here of land suitability rating system 2 and 3, and so on and so forth. So this is number 4, scenario number 4, and this is the most aggressive one, scenario number 5. You can see pretty much all the grasslands have been converted into croplands here. Okay, how do we interpret these maps? So to think about this in a more accessible way and more digestible way, I thought of bringing this satellite image to an area that have a lot of these features that we talked about, some urbanization areas, large cities, like, for example, Calgary or Okotoks, smaller city, mountain range, some cultivation areas, some water bodies. So these are like our landscapes. This is what we think about, right? So the next thing, if you overlay your land suitability rating system on top of this, hopefully you can see underneath from the transparency, you can link where these areas that we talk about as more suitable for agriculture or changing or conversion into croplands. In the center here, kind of less suitable areas in the surroundings. And as you get closer to the foothills and the mountain ranges, you start to get into areas that are more difficult to be converted into grasslands. And there are also areas that are non-rated, like the highest peaks in the mountains. These are not rated because it's impossible to be converted into croplands. Okay, so this is the land suitability rating system. So what if we overlay also our resistance map? What does this look like? So here is our resistance map, and hopefully if you can see now the link and the color ramp. So the darker means high resistance and the lighter means low resistance, right? So all cities, and again, we think of this as resistance maps for terrestrial organisms. So all cities here, you see a lot of darkness, which denotes, urbanized areas where it's really difficult for current to flow in these unnatural areas. Also, large water bodies here that you can see also have dark color scheme, which represents also high resistance values and areas where you have a gradient of this gray shows the gradient of naturalness in this landscape, and where areas that can support current. So we model the current density here, and then we show now our current density map, what this look like. And as we expected, we see this pattern of areas of pinch points, these bright colors in the map, areas that are very cold, that are blue in color, that represents different or like areas of constraints where currents cannot move, and something in between. So these yellow arrows shows or point to areas of a high current flow. So these are really important areas that can support the flow of the current due to the high values of resistance that surrounds them in the landscape. So you can think about this as ecological flow pathways or corridors. These are cold areas, so water bodies, cities, small cities, large cities, any human footprints in the area, you can see as cold areas, and in between these shades of diffused currents. And diffuse currents here means that it's not like a high, nothing to talk about quality here, high quality versus low quality or anything. It just means that this area has low resistances, so the current can pretty much go anywhere. It can diffuse, it can go anywhere. It doesn't have high values that can bound it or only constrain it to move in a certain direction, right? So this is how we interpret these current density maps. So we started with the land suitability rating systems and how we created our scenarios. We created these corresponding resistance layers from each one. And as you can see, as the conversion scenario gets more progressive, the map or the resistance map become more dark or darker, as you can see. So we lose a lot of these natural features. And then the important part is the current density. So here we measured the current density as the mean of the standardized current across all maps. So all maps are comparable and are on the same scale. So as you can see here, this east to west corridor or high potential current flow pathway is getting demolished as we increase resistance in the landscape due to converting more grasslands into croplands. So that shows how these grasslands features and these remnant grasslands in the area are crucial in maintaining the large scale connectivity across the province. In terms of results, also, we are continuing to showing you what happened at a large scale. Where did this current diverge? So here in this table, we have our models and how you interpret them based on the conversion scenarios. What I want to show you here is moving from the top left to right. The first one was the null model because we wanted to compare all our or to correct all our current density values to a base map that only is informed by water bodies and topography as resistance. So no footprint, nothing. So everything is natural except for when I have high elevation or when I have water bodies, I penalize these two features. Otherwise, everything is natural. So this is kind of, the correction layer. And then we have a status quo layer, and that is pretty much the current condition now that has changed from the historic condition, which is the null model. And then every scenario after this is going to be a scenario of conversion of grasslands. So most of this current has been lost here with the northern part of the east of the grassland zone and the parkland. And the current is really focused in the foothill areas that connects the south and the southeast to the north and the Boreal region. Think of this as large scale biodiversity or ecological flow map. And as we apply more conversion of the grasslands, you see this network here of the remaining grasslands disappearing from one scenario to the other until we reach here. So we where the most aggressive grassland scenario that nothing is remaining except for very remnant features or native grasslands that can connect ecological flow east to west. But what's important here, what I want you to to notice here is the diversion of the current as we move through the scenarios. So most of these lost currents in the southeast corner have been compensated through the foothill areas up north in the upper part of the parkland and going north towards the Boreal region. So these currents that are lost from these zones are compensated by other natural features that help diverting these currents on south to north kind of route across the province. We looked at the rate of change or the percent of change at different spatial scales. For example, on top here, this is the percent change between scenarios at the municipality level, and on the bottom row at the quarter section level. So these are two kind of most relevant to policy where most of the planning happens. So we want to understand to what degree these conversions can impact these zones or these units in terms of how much they lose, right? So as you also see, these simulated changes were more pronounced in finer scale. So these finer scale here, for example, you see like everything is lost, but here you still see some corridors and some important areas that still can communicate current that are inherited from the historic existence of these grassland features in the landscape. And then, unfortunately, with aggressive scenarios, they started to disappear from the landscape, but still the remaining natural zones and natural areas and grasslands can help maintain these large-scale connectivities. The other important result in this paper as well is we want to quantify where these currents go per natural region, because when we think of these natural regions as important elements to support ecological flow in the landscape, and each one has its own ecological characteristics, we want to know how much current is gained versus lost in these different regions. So we have the grasslands, parkland, mountains, and foothills, and also the boreal and Canadian shields. These are kind of high-level classification of ecological zones in the province. And the interesting thing is what you see here in these bar charts. So each one represent the scenario. Each bar represent the scenario, and the colors here, blue represent lost current, purple represent diffused current, and yellow presents diverted current. So think of yellow as pinch points or important areas of ecological flow. Diffused current is kind of the average in between, and blue color is areas where you lose actual connectivity. So if you think of the first row here, grassland, the parkland, what I want you to focus on is particularly the yellow pieces or portions in the bar charts. And as you can see, as the scenario of conversion progresses, we lose a lot of these high quality pixels that can communicate current, right? So apparently, most noticeably in the grassland, we lose a lot from current condition into scenario number 5. And then in parkland as well, but not as noticed. It's still like, at much lower scale because there is not much grassland left in that region. That's why we say this is a very important region to look after. So if we want to keep the east to west current flow, we have to think about the grasslands in this zone. The opposite pattern to this is the foothills, and those are kind of the backbone or the survival kit of the current density. The ways that can compensate the loss in these southeast corners are these corridors. So foothills and mountains. Of course, these are parts of the foothills, not the actual mountains themselves, but when you look at the diverted current, you see an increase pattern as the scenario progression goes on. So as we have more aggressive scenarios of conversion, actually these lost current from these areas are compensated here in these zones. So these quality pixels become more important now in maintaining the large scale connectivity. And then at the last, so the boreal and Canadian shield, there is not much going on there because we don't have much grassland in these areas, so pretty much it stay constant across the different scenarios. So thinking of these components together, here are some lessons learned from this project. So I think it's obvious now to say that the grasslands are backbone for ecological flow. They can really support large-scale ecological flow across the province, and they support the provincial connectivity network, not just because of they are grasslands, but they connect also other important ecological regions across the province. We've seen also that the modeled connectivity trends are changing over time. We saw in our maps that these pathways are shifting and diverting as future assumptions or like future scenarios of converting grasslands are happening. And we've seen that foothills and what's remaining in the mountain regions and foothills and also the northern part of the parkland are really, really important areas to think about for maintaining connectivity because they harbor most of the remaining grasslands and the support most of the diverted ecological flow, not just because of the remaining or remnant grasslands, which is very low in these areas, but because of the other natural features that are kept in this area. And because of all these changes, we see that not one umbrella or not one concept or one policy can work to maintain the grasslands or the connectivity. Some tailored approaches should be taken to prioritize where we can manage and prioritize conversion, conservation of the grasslands. But at the bigger picture of things also, we've seen that, converting these grasslands with all biodiversity that they harbor into these deserts of croplands and other, human impacted features can lead to these connectivity deserts in the southern of the province, and we saw that in our results. But to put things back into perspectives and to think about the larger scale, how this is impacting the connectivity corridors in Canada in general as a nation, and also between Canada and the US and the Mexico, the entire continent. What role does this natural grassland um, is serving to maintaining these really important high ecological pathways across these zones? So we've seen here from the local scale at where we think of the prairie grassland provinces. We have a hotspot here of grassland that can maintain ecological flow, and it's really dangerous to degrade these lands or convert them without thinking wisely about the consequences. At the national scale, when you look there, you see like, okay, there are still a little bit left over at the larger scheme of things. When we think of a national scheme of connectivity, these are the east to west kind of, main important corridors. But when you think of the continental approach, here in Alberta, you see like it's pretty much a desert. Like whatever is remaining from the south of Mexico here and extending up north into the States and then back into the prairie region. This corridor here that is maintained by the Rockies and the foothills in the east of it is crucial lifeline to maintain the large-scale connectivity, and we really should work together effectively to balance the change in the landscape if this is a must that has to be done, and to prioritize where we can conserve our landscapes and grasslands. So with that, I would like to thank you very much. And I also want to thank my co-authors and my collaborators. Here's also another scan, a QR code to scan if you'd like to connect with me. You'll have my website and my work phone number and my email. So please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to take any questions now.
All right, thank you, Hossam. So if you have any questions, you can either type it out in the chat, or I'll be able to unmute you, or maybe you can unmute yourself.
No. It's Ian. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question, and I'm sorry, I only checked my email at about 1:15, so I missed the beginning of your excellent presentation. I guess there's three things that are at the top of my mind. One is like under current policy with the South Sask regional plan, native prairie is largely off limit, and the ability to differentiate between conversion on tame grassland reseeded as opposed to native, we don't really have that level of information, even within our own state of the prairie stuff that the PCF has done. So I'm thinking, ideally, you would, unless one assumes a change in current policy, you will be looking at your S2, S3, S4, S5 series, excluding native, but including tame grass in those conversions. And I don't think we have the information to do that at the moment. The second thing that struck me was the compensation issue. I don't really understand that. I certainly see the importance of the Cordillera as a connectivity corridor, but the nature of the biome, both in terms of its vegetational complex and certainly in terms of its species, is largely different stuff anyway. So you're not going to compensate for what you're losing in the grassland. If you lose it in the grassland, it's largely gone. You're talking about different biomes and different species, for the most part, that are in that Cordillera connectivity. And the final observation, Hossam, was with regard to the Belote modeling on the North American context. I think if you look at that pattern, you see the level of connectivity with our grasslands and the grasslands to the south all the way through to Mexico in a pretty complex network. And it's oftentimes the stuff that's at the fringes, and we're at the fringe, that is particularly important to the health of the whole. So I would not underestimate that little bit in Alberta that you're seeing in the southeast, because it is the northernmost fringe of a really important continental grassland connectivity network that the Belote modeling illustrates quite clearly. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you very much, Len. Wow, that is like multiple questions together. So I'm gonna try to address as many as I can, and I agree with you. You have spotted quite a few important points. So to start with the classification of grasslands, that's a very important point, differentiating between different types of grasslands. As you just mentioned, we don't have the quality of data specifically for native grasslands that can allow us to separate this. So in our approach, or in our paper, we were more conservative, and we applied grassland to everything that can be classified as grassland. But that's a very important point, and actually, if we dug deeper into differentiating these different types of grasslands, that could be other types of studies as well that it can expand and look into those biomes and their important wildlife and animals and plants that they harbor as well. So that is for the first question. The second question about the corridors. And the compensation of the current from in the Cordilleran zone and in the foothills in general. So these connectivity modeling approaches are species agnostic approach. So we first of all don't think of any species. So these are natural versus unnatural. So it does not speak anything to habitat quality. It does not speak anything about the types of animals that move other than they are terrestrial animals. And then anything in the map, in the resistance map, is classified on a spectrum from unnatural to natural, and what is in between, right? So when we talk about diversion or when we talk about compensation of current, there is a constant current or electric current. If you think of this as a circuit board, and you have a point A and a point B, there is a constant current that is flowing in this circuit board. And if you apply more resistors, in different areas in that circuit board, the current is going to still be the same, but the way it moves in the circuit board is going to be different. So it's going to avoid areas with high resistance in that board and move to areas with low resistance, and thus the current will be diverted in these low resistance areas. So that is what we mean by compensation of current. Does not have to do with the actual movement or the types of the biomes themselves in these zones, but it's a very important way of understanding to what degree human footprint or anthropogenic changes on the landscape can alter its naturalness and thus the movement of ecological flow in general. These ideas can be really interesting to be tested, and they have been tested in other studies where they actually used dispersal data. They used molecular data using microsatellites and SNPs data, and they also used radio tracking instruments to track the movement of animals. And they have actually validated these species agnostic maps with biodiversity and molecular data. So that is related to the second question. And the last one, the scale of the diversion current from the prairie grasslands or the prairie provinces to the national to the international zones. I just wanted to put things in perspective here to understand the importance of these remaining grasslands in maintaining larger and larger and larger scales of connectivity, but we have also to acknowledge that these maps were created with slightly different values of resistance, but still can, the general pattern or the overall pattern you can pick, and at different resolution as well. So what the maps that we created were at 100-meter resolution. The national one, the Canada from Pither et al. Was at 300-meter resolution, and the continental one was, I think, at 1 kilometer resolution or higher than that as well. So these are also important things to keep in mind, and they are not per se directly comparable, but they are also important to understand respectively, moving from the smallest scale of connectivity to the largest scale of connectivity, where grassland play a role in maintaining this ecological flow. I hope that addressed all your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions? You can unmute yourself or raise your hand if you have anything.
And I understand also there is a lot to digest, and if you need to read the paper and also go through, the talk again and see the slides again, and if you would like to reach out at any time, please do so. I love have conversations about these topics. So.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. If anyone has anything, raise your hand now or unmute yourself. Okay, I don't see anything here. But I just want to thank you, Hossam, for spending your lunch hour with us and giving us your time and information. That was a fantastic presentation. I will share that out with everyone once I get the recording ready. So if you want to refer back, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam, for facilitating this. I had fun as well, and thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate it.